The other thing that is in this gold standard vaccine schedule from our president is that he wants to change the number of routinely recommended vaccines to have sort of a core group of 10 vaccines. And then the other vaccines are sort of either just for high risk groups, like the hepatitis A vaccine, hepatitis B vaccine, the meningococcal vaccine, or to be shared clinical decision making. First of all vaccines are shared clinical decision making. We always talk to parents, the pediatrician does, as we're administering vaccines. No one is forced to get a vaccine. You can always choose not to get a vaccine. I mean, you may have to pay some societal price for that, like you may not be able to go to the school you want to go to. But for the most part, we don't have compulsory vaccination in this country. I think the only time there was compulsory vaccination in this country for children occurred in Philadelphia in 1991 and 1992. And that was because there were two fundamentalist churches, Faith Tabernacle and First Century Gospel, that had big families, big schools, and didn't vaccinate their kids. And so we had a huge measles outbreak in 91, 92. Now this is, almost 30 years into the availability of a measles vaccine, which made it all the worse. But we had 1,400 cases of measles and 9 deaths in our city in one winter. That scared people. Schools were canceling trips to the city. People were afraid to come into work in the city. Imagine that, 1,400 cases, 9 deaths in one city. And so what we did was we got a series of court orders that eventually led to the 4th court order, which was these children were compelled to be vaccinated. Now, what was interesting is those 2 schools were choosing basically a religious exemption. And we had a religious exemption in our Commonwealth and had it. So what they were doing by not vaccinating was perfectly legal. And so one of the pastors at the church, a guy named Charles Reinert, went to the American Civil Liberties Union and asked him to represent him and his congregation for doing something that was perfectly legal. So everybody assumed that the ACLU would represent him because the ACLU seems to be perfectly willing to represent unpopular causes, like neo-Nazis marching down the streets of Skokie, Illinois. I mean, they don't have a problem doing that. So everybody assumed they would do this, but they didn't. And there was a woman I think her name was Judy Leavitt, who was head of the chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union at the time. And she said something I will never forget because this is going to come up even with this executive order. She said, while it is your right to martyr yourself to your religion, it is not your right to martyr your child to your religion. And I think that is absolutely true because part of this executive order is I think that what President Trump wants to do in this order, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wants to do, is I think they want to use the power of the federal government to withhold funds in states that don't have a religious exemption, to force them to have a religious exemption. That's essentially what happened recently in Mississippi. When Mississippi didn't have a religious exemption or a philosophical exemption, had immunization rates in the 99.5% range. They had the highest immunization rates in the country and, not shockingly, had the lowest rates of vaccine-preventable diseases. I mean, this is a state that's not necessarily known for its amazing public health achievements, yet this was one. And so when they introduced a religious exemption, there was a dramatic increase in whooping cough cases and a whooping cough death. So they're right then to allow their child to die in the name of their religion, which I just think is unconscionable. It's the opposite of a religious act. I mean, religions teach us to care about our families, to care about our children, to care about our neighbors. That is at the heart of religion. Love the stranger. So why is it that this somehow is called religious in any case?